Hello and welcome to Origin of Oz, an Our Michigan Life special. I'm Brent Ashcroft. It was the product of a man's imagination, and to this day it's widely considered the greatest fairy tale ever penned and one of the greatest movies in cinematic history. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is legendary. Most know the story. What most don't know is that some of the inspiration in Oz is believed to have come from a private community in West Michigan called Macatawa. It's nestled in Ottawa County in the hills near Lake Michigan on the south end of the Holland Channel. L. Frank Baum, the author of the book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, summered with his family in Macatawa from 1899 to 1910. During his first year there, he wrote and published Oz. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll get to know L. Frank Baum by taking a trip back to Macatawa in the late 1800s, and we'll explore the lore that makes up this fascinating slice of Michigan history. If a hilly and heavily wooded neighborhood in Holland, Michigan was truly the backdrop used by L. Frank Baum while writing The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, one might wonder why this is the first time they're hearing about it. Well, let's just say Holland and the small private community of Macatawa have begun to embrace their place as being the inspiration for the Land of Oz. It's a community steeped in tradition. Windmills, wooden shoes, and spring-blooming perennials
People think of Holland for tulips.
dot the landscape.
I love it.
Dutch heritage will always be the primary theme in Holland. But some century-old lore
We need to tell that story.
about a former resident,
He had quite an imagination.
his famous fairy tale,
To have that story be birthed out of this area.
and that hilly community near the lake.
Frank Baum did actually have a cottage in the Macatawa area.
Is making some serious waves.
I'm still amazed at the number of people that grew up in this town that still don't really know that story.
One might think something this big would be widely known.
Unless you knew someone who lived in Macatawa or in Castle Park, the L. Frank Baum story is kind of a hidden secret.
I think it's kind of one of the best kept secrets, which really, why would anyone want to keep it a secret?
Holland's mayor didn't even know about it.
It took us probably living here 10 years before we heard about the Wizard of Oz coming out of this area. We heard about Castle Park and it was like, what is that? And that relates to the Wizard of Oz.
Guess what? Secret's out.
The timing couldn't be better.
2019 marks the 80th anniversary of the movie The Wizard of Oz.
I sat down in the front row and my dad sat next to me and the film comes on. And all of a sudden it says, story by L. Frank Baum. My dad leaned over and he says, that's your great-grandfather.
It's also the 100th anniversary of L. Frank Baum's death.
We need to honor Frank Baum and what he has done for so many generations of people.
Is Holland, Michigan the origin of Oz?
There is a castle. There are the winding paths in Macatawa.
This 1899 image of Baum sitting on his porch in Macatawa, clearly working on a story, speaks volumes to many.
Always like to think he was typing up the final draft to The Wonderful Wizard of Oz.
I'm a believer.
So is the mayor.
Being able to tell a story that was woven right here next to Lake Macatawa in order to encourage future generations to read, to learn, to grow, and to develop as leaders. It just is an amazing privilege to be able to claim that.
Coming up after the break, we'll explore the lore that has connected Macatawa to Oz for more than a century. To do that, we'll take a trip back to 1899 and follow L. Frank Baum's interesting journey to Michigan.
Everybody wants to be Dorothy.
Then later, who inspired the most famous Oz character? Dorothy. Could it have been this young girl from Macatawa? Welcome back to Origin of Oz. There are certainly more homes now and the roads are paved, but at its core, Macatawa is the same today as it was when L. Frank Baum visited there for the first time. What lured him there in the late 1800s? Why did he decide to make it his summer destination? And who believes with conviction that Macatawa inspired Oz? It was the Gilded Age. Economic prosperity was sweeping the land.
A lot of growth and a lot of activity.
Macatawa was quickly benefiting because the people were pouring in.
To enjoy the waters of Lake Michigan,
It was a walking community,
because that was pre-automobiles.
but many used horse and buggy or boats.
People would take the steamer from Chicago or from Milwaukee.
The year was 1899.
He was a printer, actor, you name it. He had his hand at it.
L. Frank Baum was living in Chicago with his wife Maud and their 4 sons.
He went through a lot of adversities.
Financial difficulties had taken their toll.
His store had failed, his newspaper had failed.
Baum needed to catch a break. His writing skill was where he found it.
His imagination was terrific.
It was that fall when his children's literary effort, Father Goose, His Book, was published. It was a major success that brought the Baums instant wealth, which gave them the means to travel to Michigan.
I think there was a literary group that went over to Macatawa for a day or two, and he went with them.
Once he saw it and spent time there,
He would regularly ply the waters of Lake Michigan to come here by steamer.
he couldn't resist Macatawa.
He was dedicated to coming each week.
The Baums eventually bought a home here.
A piece of property on the shoreline of Lake Michigan on the north side of a now abandoned path.
He named the cottage the Sign of the Goose because it was purchased with the money he earned from selling his Father Goose book.
He was part of something. People liked him, but he wasn't a super standout. He was just one of the people.
It was during this time that Baum happened to be working on another children's book.
He had this fairy tale he really wanted to tell.
It was far from finished,
What a powerful, powerful book this was.
but it was coming together.
It brought out the best in each individual, that you have within you the power to conquer whatever it is you have to do.
So was it this place, Macatawa,
It was the high point that got him going.
that helped L. Frank Baum pen the tale that continues to transcend generations today?
The story was building up in his mind all the way up until then. I have a feeling that something there was the catalyst to make that final push to get it, to put it together, to take all of the various bits and pieces and little stories and weave them together so that they made one complete story, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz.
You wholeheartedly believe that Macatawa, Michigan inspired Oz.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So what was it specifically that inspired L. Frank Baum while he was wrapping up The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in Macatawa?
He was that kind of a writer. Whatever was around him, if he saw that, bingo.
The people, places, and things in Macatawa Baum likely used to help create the Oz fantasy. And Dorothy was a fictional character in Oz, but hundreds of real Dorothys have come forward over the decades claiming they were the inspiration, one of them from Macatawa. Some of the most iconic illustrations from the book The Wonderful Wizard of Oz are Munchkin Land, the Yellow Brick Road, and the Wicked Witch of the West's Castle. It's believed L. Frank Baum drew inspiration from Macatawa for all of them. What did he see that likely triggered his fertile imagination to create the places in the story that have transcended generations.
As a kid, I used to play on a lot of those trails, and it suddenly dawned on me, the trees are over. And Dorothy and the Tin Woodman, the Cowardly Lion, they're walking down the yellow brick road, and the trees are hovering over, and it's getting darker and darker.
He remembers seeing it.
Your imagination made it whatever you wanted,
Because he's been here
almost every year for a while.
and likely perused the same places his great-grandfather did at the turn of the century.
And that's why I think Makatawa was probably very important.
Bob Baum believes many of the descriptions L. Frank Baum wrote in his book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, were plucked straight out of Makatawa.
There was something in everything he saw or did that brought something to his imagination, and he just filed those away or wrote them down.
It's believed that Munchkin Land was inspired by Makatawa because the cottages were built close together on the hills.
A lot of them, I think, were probably smaller than the normal homes.
Many of them still standing today from when Baum lived here.
He was that kind of a writer. Whatever was around him, if he saw that, bingo.
Did these curvy roads in Makatawa, or some of the heavily wooded trails, inspire him to imagine the yellow brick road?
As the trees grew on the side, they would kind of meet and leave a tunnel through.
In the chapter, The Road Through the Forest, Baum wrote, "They came to a great forest, where the trees grew so big and close together that their branches met over the road of yellow brick." Could he have been describing these 1899 images of the wooded Makatawa trails?
If you went at night, the sand might look a little golden.
What about Castle Park, the closest other private resort to Makatawa?
It's a very picturesque place as well. It has some unique landscape.
A castle stands prominently in the middle of the community. L. Frank Baum was known to frequent here.
Frank's imagination, oh, castle, okay, bingo, it's been implanted.
In the chapter, The Rescue, Baum references a yellow castle twice. He wrote, "Now they were reunited. Dorothy and her friends spent a few happy days at the yellow castle, where they found everything they needed to make them comfortable."
People's conception of a castle is more the witch's castle.
It's been yellow since it was built in 1896.
I really do feel that that was a real catalyst.
Some of the artwork in the book was inspired from Makatawa.
I know that the illustrator he had, William Denslow, came over one time.
Dorothy was drawn with pigtails and a gingham dress. One of the flying monkeys wore a hat.
They were part of what was going on at the time he was doing it.
The evidence could be in this image, taken in Makatawa in 1899. A young girl with pigtails, wearing a gingham dress, looking at a monkey wearing a hat. Here's more photos of the same girl. When you saw these particular pictures, did that blow your mind?
It blew my mind because they were taken at a time when he was there. The people who were around him, he did see. He saw all of those people. He interacted with all of those people.
Coincidence? Bob Baum doesn't think so.
It's scary how close things came maybe to not being done, or how so many things had to fall together at the right order in the right place with the right person to make it happen.
And that leaves us with the mysterious identity behind the most important character in Oz, Dorothy.
I can feel it because the book and the family history has always been there.
This man supports a claim that the real Dorothy lived in Makatawa when Baum was there. We'll explore that claim when Origin of Oz continues. Dorothy is one of the most iconic fictional characters ever created in one of the most iconic books ever written. What if she didn't come from fiction? Many women have come forward in the last century claiming they were the inspiration behind L. Frank Baum's Dorothy of Oz. Two claims have endured. One involves a Baum family member, the other, a little girl who was his next-door neighbor in Macatawa.
She has been, and always will be, one of the most iconic fictional characters ever created.
Everybody wants to be Dorothy.
She's the main protagonist in L. Frank Baum's classic novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and most of the sequels that followed.
I think that's one of the things that make Oz what it is.
For decades, the only images of Dorothy were the book illustrations. Until the movie in 1939, where Dorothy was finally
Who said that?
human. Judy Garland's portrayal of the heroine will forever delight generations.
I didn't mean to kill her. Really, I didn't.
Many have wondered, who was she? Is Dorothy truly fictional?
I don't want to squash anybody's stories.
If Robert Baum could time travel back to Macatawa in 1899 and ask his great-grandfather one question,
I'd be very nervous to meet him.
who was Dorothy would be it. After the book was published, the claims kept coming.
He met thousands of Dorothys.
And coming.
Just so many possibilities.
For Robert, two claims have stood the test of time. One is from within the Baum family.
I have heard that story a great deal.
Spring 1898. A baby was born to Sophie and Thomas Gage. Thomas is the brother of Maud Baum, L. Frank's wife. The Gages named their daughter Dorothy. 5 months later, Dorothy passed away.
I have read a diary that talks about the child dying in Maud's arms.
Maud wrote a letter to her sister Helen saying, "Dorothy was a beautiful baby. I could have taken her for my very own and loved her devotedly."
I think in part it's the daughter that Maud never had.
L. Frank couldn't comfort his wife after Dorothy's death, so the theory is he named the heroine of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz after his niece to soothe Maud.
Was it or wasn't it? I mean, it's still not super definitive, but you understand it.
Dorothy Gage is buried in Bloomington, Illinois. Her cemetery marker says this is more than just a claim.
Yep, another time.
The second claim is from a family whose lineage has been a part of Macatawa for more than a century.
First McCroy came in 1892.
Bert McCroy believes it's true.
Having grown up in this family, that we don't pass on comic book stories.
It involves his cousin who lived across the street.
She was a close friend, and I followed and stayed with her completely through her life, all the way to the end.
Her name was Dorothy Hall,
She has been here every summer of her life.
including the summer of 1899. Dorothy Hall's grandparents, George and Ada McCroy, were friends with L. Frank and Maud Baum when they lived in Chicago. They'd summer together in Macatawa.
Dorothy's house, family cottage, was across the sidewalk from Sign of the Goose, which was Frank Baum's home.
Dorothy was 2 years old.
Those two families, Dorothy, my great-grandparents, and the Baum family, would come on the ships from Chicago and get off in Lake Macatawa and come over to their cottage.
On the ship, George and Ada McCroy witnessed L. Frank Baum interacting with their granddaughter and heard him say to her,
You know, if I ever write a story about a girl, I'm going to call her Dorothy.
was this little girl the inspiration for Dorothy?
Even when I was there with my grandmother, I think on occasion I met Fairies people, and I remember meeting her and being introduced as, you know, she was the Dorothy. So I kind of grew up with it.
Which of the two claims is true?
I can feel it because the book and the family history has always been there.
The answer could be neither.
It never dawned on me to say, okay, which one is number 1, 2, 3. I don't think there was.
Or both.
There is some Dorothy in every woman.
Robert Baum is a diplomat when it comes to Dorothy.
I like to think that he never met a Dorothy that he didn't use in his story.
So what should we make of it all? Was Maketawa a source for L. Frank Baum as he was writing The Wonderful Wizard of Oz? Or is it just lore, mythology, that's become its own fairy tale over time? There is one certainty. For Baum, there was no place like home, and one of his favorite homes was his Sign of the Goose in Maketawa, Michigan. Thanks for watching Origin of Oz. For photojournalist Evan Linnert, I'm Brent Ashcroft. We'll see you next time.